Hello again, Kingston Town Administrator Keith Hickey with the latest edition of Kingston in Depth. This episode is being taped on May 17th, 2023. With me today is Kingston's Town Planner Valerie Massard. Thanks for being here, Valerie. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk today about some of the items going on in development issues going on in Kingston, what we're looking at trying to do behind the scenes to prepare Kingston for the future, zoning-wise, and talk a little bit about what the impact of the water and sewer moratorium may have on Kingston and what it's going to allow us to do while we work our way through that moratorium. So with that, obviously, we just finished up town meeting a couple of weeks ago, and things went pretty well. There were no zoning articles on the town meeting in the spring. We plan to have some zoning articles on a fall town meeting that we have to have this year. The school department is in need of a fall town meeting, so we're going to take advantage of that opportunity and have some zoning articles on there, as well as some bylaw change articles on there as well. So a lot of housekeeping type items. Haven't set a town meeting date for the fall yet, but it'll probably be sometime, I would guess, in October or November. So with that, jumping into some of the planning issues that we're dealing with right now, what do you see as some of the planning or zoning changes that may come forward this fall?
Well, thanks. So we're looking at the housekeeping, like you said, back in 2019, there was a change to the zoning bylaw, which just really reorganized it. But when that happened, we found that there have been some things that we'd like to tweak in that.
Sure.
So there's quite a few little housekeeping things or things that we've figured out as we've gone through using the bylaw that we could improve on. We're looking at whether or not we can reduce the frontage requirements for the rodeo, so-called open space cluster subdivisions, to maybe allow for more development that way, and whether we can enhance and improve on the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, or ADU, which might allow for additional housing units to be put in as additions on houses in town. We allow it, but we have a lot of restrictions on it that we'd like to explore a little bit over the summer.
We are getting more and more people coming in, I think, looking for accessory dwelling units for, aging parents, things of that nature, I assume, or even now college kids that are graduating from school and need a place to live until they can afford to get their own spot. So
Right.
I know that there's been some talk, at least in the building, about some of the challenges that our current zoning is causing for.
Well, yeah, even
for
a
the
simple
planning.
example on that is that all parking for that is required to be in the rear of the house. And that's not always feasible. So simple, small things like that we could adjust where it makes sense. And
Sure.
it would really open up the flexibility a little bit for the town.
So we're not, there's been a lot of concern, I think, certainly at town meeting it was voiced about, Kingston continuing to grow by leaps and bounds and residence-wise, and some of the things that the planning board might look at as far as zoning changes really isn't geared to enhance the ability for developers to come into Kingston and expand. It's really more for homeowners that want to make their house more usable for the different options that families now seem to have with their households. So I think it's important for people to recognize that some of these changes really, we're not trying to enhance development here. We're trying to make it more usable, make the dwelling units more usable that we have. Is that fair?
Yeah, and for example, the census tells us that the type of families has changed since the standard, 3-bedroom house doesn't always fit now today's modern family. So it's very common to have people living at home well into their adulthood. So having some flexibility with an accessory dwelling unit or other alternatives would make what we have, some of this beautiful historic home stock, actually fit today's environment and today's needs without having a whole lot of impact on the town. And we think that is good, and we want to improve on that. Another thing that's come up in talking about zoning changes is, that there's that horizon about the MBTA zoning that we've touched on a little bit. We'll be talking about it more as we go into the fall town meeting, but we won't be voting on that in the fall. We're hoping to come to the town meeting in the spring with an MBTA zoning change. And as you mentioned, there's the moratoriums on both water and sewer. And just to touch base on that for viewers, if they're not familiar with that, both the Water Commission, which is a separate body, has determined that with a lot of the growth that we've just had, they're out of water pressure in terms of new growth. So we have existing water, and that's in good shape, but we need to maybe add a well, look for an additional tower.
Sure.
It's going to take some time to figure that out. And then with the wastewater treatment plant, which was on the town meeting warrant, that we need to connect with some new leaching fields. So that's maybe a shorter horizon for that moratorium. But again, any hookups are limited right now. So
Yeah, so the people coming in, building single-family homes, things of that nature, there should be water and sewer availability for those types of
for
new
redeveloping
homes.
an existing home.
Sure.
Or if it's already been an approved subdivision, but anything new, including a new single-family lot, is not available for hookup right now. And then it also relates to higher density on a site where there's an existing house. For example,
Sure.
in Manamet, there was some conversation about Howlands Road. There was a possible multifamily going in, and then they were downsizing that. And now with the water and the sewer moratorium, it's got one house on it, and that's what they can put in there right now.
Sure. And
So-
there's a lot of developments that have been discussed, at least with staff members. A couple of presentations, maybe to a couple of different boards, but we have, on the near horizon, anyways, a proposal to redevelop the Catholic High School,
Yeah.
Sacred Heart. The developer is coming to the Board of Selectmen meeting on June 20th for a pretty significant subdivision of that property. Even if at this point the town was supportive of a project like that, at this point we just aren't able to approve that because we just can't provide the water unless,
Right. Or
of
sewer.
course, and sewer,
Yeah.
unless of course they have the capacity of doing it themselves. Just to maybe remind people or refresh people's memory, the water commissioners have come to not this spring's town meeting, but the last couple of town meetings, asking for authority to proceed with eminent domain proceedings on a piece of property where they've identified that property as a property that would have a high yield well under it. Unfortunately, the previous owner of the house passed away unexpectedly, and the heirs have been dealing with that estate, and they and the water commissioners haven't been able to sit down and come to terms yet. My understanding is that the dialogue has opened up and they are having conversations. I'm not quite sure where they are at this point or how close they may be to obtaining or coming to some sort of an agreement on price. But they are working towards that, and if they even were to come to an agreement on price, it's, from my understanding, several years to go through the process of getting approved well through the state. So, sewer department, as you mentioned, had a warrant article at town meeting this spring to fund a septic field up at that abuts Indian Pond, or it's Indian Pond Estates. Ultimately, that warrant article failed. And the sewer department now, wastewater department now, doesn't have the ability to really take on any additional significant wastewater projects as well.
They had gone from 2 tanks to 4 tanks, and we also acquired a new leaching field right next to Indian Pond Estates on the other side of where we currently have our septic leaching field for the wastewater treatment, which is actually under the golf course. And that's aging. It's not aged out, but we're hoping to connect to the new one, and we're exploring our options because it's expensive to connect to that new leaching field. And when we do, we're also asking questions about what the long-term planning should be for sewer, related to not just growth and development, but also the issue of the nutrients in the bay.
Right.
And I know that it hasn't really come here yet, but the Cape has some issues where there's what's called a national estuary program under the federal government, where they've been studying and sampling all the bays and including Plymouth and Duxbury Bay. And they've been sampling those and finding that the nutrient loads from, golf courses, fertilized lawns, septic systems, you name it, different kinds of uses, the nutrient loading in the bays is affecting the quality of the water.
Right.
And so one of the things that's happening right now on Cape Cod is they're exploring new rules that the DEP is proposing for even tighter regulations on what can go into the bay, either from pipes or from the, washing off the road, or the land there. So we're going to be faced with the same issues, and they're expensive. So the question's going to be, how much capacity do we need on that fourth tank to connect people that aren't on the system yet, and how would we go about doing that? Or whether we'd have to expand the sewer to certain areas to accommodate the requirements that are going to be put on us as they are now exploring on the Cape. So I think the outcome of what happens on the Cape will kind of tell us where we're headed.
Yeah, the wastewater commissioners came in front of the Board of Selectmen at some point in the last 6 to 9 months and made a presentation about some of these new requirements that may come forward and the options that might be available to a community. And they seem to be either, upgrading the existing septic systems at a few $1,000s a system.
Like $40,000.
Yeah, or potentially, putting those properties that have septic systems that ultimately drain into the bay or have an impact on the bay on municipal sewer, and therefore reducing the amount of runoff that goes into the bay as well. So, I think there's going to be a need for wastewater, whether it be through expansion or just trying to mitigate some of the issues that we're having environmentally. I'm sure that topic will come back up at a town meeting and at a Board of Selectmen meeting sometime in the near future. But in the meantime, there's some good and bad with holding off on new connections. It allows the town to kind of take a breath and take a look and see, how we want to move forward. Zoning wise, are there some changes to zoning that we could make to keep the integrity of Kingston while allowing some growth and some redevelopment? But it does come at a cost, right? We aren't going to see the new growth that we have seen over the past few years that has allowed us to maintain our tax rates and afford some of the things that we've been purchasing, whether it be capital items or improvements to buildings that are in need of improvement. Without that new growth, it's a loss of a revenue stream for the town that will mean having it be more challenging to balance a budget on an annual basis for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that we have a few proposals that have been talked about. Last year was one of the busiest years the planning board has ever seen in Kingston. And now this year it's really come to a big slowdown, not just because of the moratoriums, but even before that.
Sure.
And I think that's a reflection of what's happening nationwide. But I do think that it gives us an opportunity to take that deep breath, and we're working with Old Colony Planning Council, who's put us on their plan. We've asked them to help us do a corridor study to look at zoning on 3A. And we're starting with the town line in Plymouth, working our way back across where Cancun's is and a little bit up that way. We think that there could be better redevelopment there.
Sure.
There's a couple of sites where they may be brownfields, which means that there might be or might not be pollution underneath the ground that we need to go and check out. And then because that's an unknown, the people who own those properties haven't redeveloped them in a while, and they're starting to look a little bit sad and lonely. So we want to help inspire those property owners. Yesterday I was at a brownfields conference and learning a lot about what EPA and the University of Connecticut and DEP and Mass Development have to offer the town, and we're hoping to work with them pretty closely. The other thing we've been able to do through Old Colony Planning Council is get named onto their work plan for the fiscal year 2024 coming up in July, which will do a comprehensive study of the traffic, of the zoning, the land uses, and long-term trends, and help us figure out what can we do to make the best use of that land in a way that makes sense for the residents that live there, the businesses that are there. How can we enhance that?
Right.
And maybe we can connect to the rail trail that's gone all the way up to the town line in Plymouth this year. And what are those things we can do to help prevent sea level rise from impacting 3A or the rail line? So we're looking at a lot of long-term issues that we've seen come on the radar since the master plan was done that weren't there. The MBTA zoning is another part of that, but in a way, the water and sewer moratorium gives us a deep breath on that, because we know even if we zone it, it won't come right away. And that's sort of an opportunity for us to think about it a little bit more in a long-term horizon, which I think is easier for the town to take in.
And the planning department's also done some planning and applied for some grants, and a couple of those examples. The first one that we got funded for, and it was local funding as well as some state funding, was the exit 20 Tremont Street interchange there.
Yeah.
With Valerie's help, Valerie's been in Kingston now for just about 2 years. Prior to coming to Kingston, she was in a neighboring Duxbury. Just the synergy of having Valerie being aware of both communities' needs in that area. We're able to get on the state's highway plan.
Yeah.
And have a contribution from both the town of Duxbury and the town of Kingston to fund some of the engineering work. And we're hoping that in the next couple of years or so, you'll start seeing some improvements on that interchange. I know using that road on a regular basis, it can be a bit challenging at times.
Yeah.
We've had a number of accidents up there that both Duxbury and Kingston have had to respond to. So we'll start seeing some real improvements in that area sometime in the near future.
Yeah, we're hoping that we'll do the construction in 2026, and it'll add signals so that the people that, we haven't had anyone, thank goodness, injured there seriously, but it could happen. It's one of the high intersection dangers there. And we will hope to improve the pedestrian capacity of walking from Duxbury into Kingston. It's kind of funny, having done the master plan in Duxbury, that's named as a commercial part of Duxbury's master plan, because a lot of people in Duxbury come over to Kingston just over the town line to do their shopping. And then we're looking at longer term, trying to make more improvements to the intersection where the CVS is and the Big Y. And we may be able to tie in some of the pedestrian improvements ahead of that. So it takes time to do those projects, and believe it or not, it was almost 11 years ago that project was added into the long-term planning programming for the state. And so hopefully it wouldn't take us that long, but it does take a number of years to do the work. And so we're talking about old exit 10, now known as exit 20, and I don't know if everyone realizes that it's almost a $2 million project to do the improvements that we're talking about, and 25% of that, on top of that, is the engineering. Right. So it's no small investment to make those kinds of improvements. But we are talking with the state about that, and we're also talking with the state about this corridor study. Right. And they're going to be making improvements to the Smiths Lane Bridge in the nearer future, probably around the same time. And we're talking about whether or not they might make changes to the off-ramps, which is where the mall is, if you are more local. The old exit 8, which I think is 17 now, Rocky Nook. Yes. So that's another one where we're looking at what the gateways. We got a grant for Complete Streets. I was going to touch on that as well. Yeah, we're starting that. We just put out for bid to have improvements made to the intersection of 106, 27 and Main Street. And that's a road intersection that everyone passes through, but it's been a long time since we've been able to touch that and make it better. We're going to really bring it up to speed, make it safer to walk, improve the signaling there. And then hopefully that will start to spur and work its way out. We have funding from some negotiated improvements that we did through Amazon and some of the other projects that we're using to fund to do town-wide infrastructure improvements in terms of both traffic safety, but also pedestrian and bicycles. What can we do to make things that we have more connected, greener, and more vibrant? So we're exploring several different opportunities that we think are going to start to bring together that newer, updated version of what we want to see as Kingston residents. Sure, and so just to talk very briefly,
Kingston applied for a complete street grant with Valerie and Paul Bazar being the main people who spent the time to get this done. We had to hire an engineering firm. They identified what the priorities were for pedestrian and walking, riding bikes, those types of things. What the priorities were for improvements, and we identified, to your point, 27 Evergreen Street, Main Street, as the biggest concern. So they've done all the legwork. They've done the design work. We're going to go out to bid, and hopefully sometime this summer you'll start seeing contractors out there. They'll be modifying the intersection a little bit, but more importantly, I think they're going to have pedestrian traffic signals. So when you get there, if you're walking, you're on a bike, and you want to cross the road, you can push a button rather than waiting for a big enough gap in the traffic to run across the road. Right. We'll be improving the sidewalks out there and things of that nature. So we're trying to utilize as much monies that we can from other sources to make some of the improvements that need to be made to make Kingston safer. Is that intersection and the pedestrian accessibility the most important improvement we need to make in Kingston right now? No.
But it scored the highest in that plan.
Right, and it's, frankly, it's, there's a lot of the improvements we need to make are on the town's dime. We're planning for that. There's another $500,000 in the budget this year to make improvements to roadways in town from tax money. But we're trying to supplement that as best we can with grant funds and other resources. Like the improvements to exit 20, like the Main Street Evergreen Street intersections, and sprinkle those in, and hopefully as time goes on, people will really start seeing some changes and some improvements to make Kingston a safer, more walkable community in many, many cases. So with that, any other thoughts you want to bring up today before we wrap things up for today? Are you...
I hope anybody that's interested in the zoning will tune into some of our planning board meetings in June, because I'm gonna look for direction in June and then get working on my pen and paper through August, so that when we can come back in September with those recommendations, that people can learn about those and offer their input. But we're looking forward to making those improvements and working with the community to continue to make the town reflect what they want to see.
And it's important for the planning board and Valerie to find out what people's feelings are. And right now, we have the ability to provide remote meeting accessibility. So in the past, people felt like they didn't want to jump in their car and drive down and have to participate in person. If you want to sit on the couch or sit outside in a chair and enjoy the weather and link up by iPhone or iPad or whatever your preference is. It's important to share with the different boards and commissions that are working on this stuff what your feelings and needs are, so they can be taken into consideration and melded into the process. Without that, the planning board will make some assumptions and take their experiences to develop what that plan is going to look like. And so it's always important. We desperately need people's input at the beginning of the process rather than at the very end. Makes for a better plan overall. So please try to keep in touch and be aware of what the planning board's doing.
And I wanted to add too that we have a new assistant town planner, Erin Benoit, who's from Kingston, and that really adds to that local knowledge. So we're excited to have her on board, and that gives me more time to do the planning end of things, and she's doing a great job. So I think that will help, as we had hoped when we created this position, to allow for even more planning activities to take place.
So I want to thank everybody very much. I want to thank everybody very much for watching the latest edition of Kingston in Depth. We'll try to make this a more regular show and look to try to do some other different types of shows in the near future to allow people to participate in what goes on and have a say in what's happening. So with that, I want to thank Valerie Massard, our town planner, for being here today. Again, I'm Keith Hickey, the Kingston Town Administrator. I want to thank you for watching, and hope you have a great day.